Hi everyone, welcome to episode 3 of UNICEF at UCLA's podcast series. In this series, we will be focusing on the mental health of immigrants at the southern border of the United States. I'm here today with Dulce Garcia, the director of BorderAngels, and she's here to share her expertise. Can you please just tell us about your organization? What services does BorderAngels provide for immigration, and is the mental health of immigrants taken into account when you develop the resources that you provide?
BorderAngels has a mission that is very much based on love and aimed at reducing the amount of death at our US-Mexican border. So we have programs. Our most well-known program is our water drop program, where our team goes into the desert and provides water and supplies for folks that are crossing the US-Mexican border. They also go into mountains where people are dying from hypothermia and literally freezing to death to provide supplies to keep folks warm as well. We have other programs like the Familias Reunidas Immigration Bond Fund that provides funds to get people out of the detention center. In 2020, the first year that we opened this program, we posted 69 bonds. So that was 69 families that we were able to reunite through this program. We have our Green Card for Kids program that also provides legal support for kids that have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by their parents, and they are in the custody of the county without an immigration lawyer. So we filled in that gap and provided an attorney for them. We had a child that was facing deportation last year, and we were able to stop that deportation, and we actually won her green card. So one of her first questions she had upon learning of her green card was, oh, does this mean I can go to college now? So she's already dreaming about a future in the US. We also support 17 shelters in Tijuana, including the encampment that has been recently formed this year in 2021. There are thousands of migrants that are waiting for the doors to open so they can make their claim to asylum. The prior administration closed the doors, and because of COVID, used an excuse to expel migrants to say the US doesn't feel safe in allowing asylum seekers in, so they closed the door to them. And so now we have in Tijuana thousands of people that have been waiting, some for almost 2 years, even before COVID, because of the dismantling of the asylum process. In the 17 shelters that we support, we often see single mothers and families that are in very desperate situations to cross over. Some mothers have had the difficult decision of sending their teenage boys across the border in hopes that they'll survive. And so we support with things like paying for their rent, their utilities, food, and any other expenses they may need to house our migrant families there. We also have the day labor outreach in the US. Those are, you've noticed in some stores like the Home Depots, for example, there are some day laborers that for one reason or another cannot secure permanent employment. We saw an increase of asylum seekers doing this when the Trump administration took away work permits for asylum seekers. So we support also in providing legal assistance to them, and sometimes the only meal that they have for the day. And so the day labor outreach is done in the US as well. And that's how actually BorderAngels started, by doing this outreach and then expanded onto other more formal legal consultations and labor employment law consultations. And of course, we do our advocacy. I sit as the chair of the San Diego Immigrant Rights Consortium, the SBCC, and other coalitions, because we don't do this work in isolation. So to give you an example of the Familias Reunidas bond program, we had requests for bonds that were $10,000, $20,000, $40,000, $60,000, and we couldn't pay for them ourselves entirely. So there were several organizations that we would pull our money together to be able to get these people out, so that asylum seekers wouldn't be in detention centers as their cases are heard. So we do this in collaboration with other organizations to push forward more humane immigration laws and policies, because all of these programs are a direct result of our policies. We hope that we don't have to do this work in the future, but unfortunately, because our immigration laws are so inhumane, we have had to fill in this gap. And when we provide these services, we do keep in mind the struggle that migrants are going. As an example, the detention center work, we very much had mental health in our minds. Some of us are directly impacted by these policies and have experienced these things, and we know how difficult it is for our immigrant community. And as we were navigating COVID-19 last year, we were getting calls from people in detention centers that were afraid of the harassment and the horrible conditions inside of detention. And on top of it all, a fear of dying from COVID-19. Sadly, we experienced the first COVID-19 related death here at the Otay Mesa Detention Center last year, as they were in these spaces where you couldn't socially distance, you were not receiving masks or a gel or anything to protect yourself. And so these migrants in the detention centers felt like they were being disregarded completely by the government, and that definitely traumatized them in their horrible experience in detention. But that is one program that came about because we have had family members that have been in these situations. We have had friends and families that have gone through this process that we know traumatizes them. Some are fleeing from extreme violence. Asylum seekers, we've heard stories from them where they have visible signs of torture on their bodies, and when they present themselves to our port of entry for a right to claim asylum, they're put in detention centers, and some have suffered kidnapping, incarceration by their government, and then we put them in a detention center in horrible conditions. So all of that plays on people's mental health, and we consider that when we have these programs. We are doing legal consultations at El Chaparral in Tijuana, where there are 2,000 migrants, 500 children sleeping in tents in the streets, waiting for the doors to open. And we know that they are very much afraid of dying there because they are threatened by the cartels, by the gangs, violence even by the local police. And knowing this, when we do our legal consultations, we do it in collaboration with Psicólogos Sin Fronteras, which are psychologists that are volunteering their time to do the intake for us. So they're the first ones to talk to these folks so that they open up to them and tell their stories in a much more comfortable way that sometimes they might not open up to an immigration officer. And so when they come to us, they feel more at ease, more comfortable to tell us these very painful stories. Some of kidnapping, torture, rape, very traumatizing stories that we know it's difficult for them to even speak about and tell you what it is that they're looking for, and it really is just a way of surviving. And we keep that in mind when we do the work that we do in the shelters in the space at El Chaparral, and including even the water drop. It's something that impacts our very own volunteers as well. Even for folks that are already in the US, there's a study from UC Davis that came out a couple of years ago that said for migrant children from Mexico, we're more likely to experience depression and anxiety than our counterparts in Mexico, despite all the things that they undergo in Mexico, because of all of what it means to be undocumented in the US, and all of the stigma that is still very much surrounding our community. So we keep all of that in mind in our advocacy, which is another big part of the work that we do.
Could you tell us how mental health is impacted by those who go through the immigration process?
Yes. So no one leaves their home seeking asylum because they want to experience the US, for tourism reasons, right? People flee from their homes because they were survivors of some violence. They're being pushed out of their country. They're looking for a way to survive. And that departure alone is very painful. To have to leave your home out of need is very painful. To have to leave behind your family, to know that once you come into another country, sometimes 13 countries to get to the US-Mexico border, it means that you have to go through a lot of pain on the way because there's still a lot of hate surrounding our immigrant community. There's a lot of violence. And so folks that go through all of these experiences in their journey to the US, they know that they're experiencing all of these difficulties, and it's not over when they get to the US. The US government many times separates families. Their biggest fear is often what will happen to their children, whether they're going to be separated because of all the horrible that came about from the last presidency. So there's that fear and concern that also plays in their mental health when they depart their home countries, knowing that the doors are closed. They might have to endure even more pain as they attempt to cross us, always having this feeling of being treated less than, of not being accepted or welcomed by the government. Sometimes the violence comes at the hands of our very own federal government, our own agents, our own officers. And instead of welcoming them with a hug and embracing them, we put them in a detention center and ask for thousands of dollars for their release. It criminalizes them and tells them what they've done is wrong and what they have done is attempting to survive. So all of that impacts them when they come to the US. But interesting enough is that they are often, once they are released from detention and in their homes in the US with their friends and family, they're often grateful and hopeful. And I feed on to that. I feed from that hope because they have some sort of respite. Once they finally get to their final destination in the US, they are often grateful for having a home and having survived that. And so they're very, very humble people, and often traumatized by our own government. And so, yes, that mental health does impact them and stays with them, even in their lives in the US. I know when my own brother was put in a detention center years ago by another administration, that played on his mental health. And the clients that I talk to, same thing. They fear detention so much of being put in a cell again because of the horrible treatment that they have received. And this hasn't changed since the time that we started to put people in detention centers for profit. We have created a system where private corporations are making money off of the pain of these people every single day. There's at least 15,000 migrants in these spaces where private corporations are making money off of them with the purpose of profiting. So we know that this stays with them forever. There's no mental health services in detention centers. The people that are running these spaces are not mental health experts. This mental health screening that is done initially when somebody goes into a detention center is less than 5 minutes. And so it's very inhumane what we do, because culturally not everyone sees mental health the same as mental health experts do. And so they should know, the people that are doing these screenings in these detention centers, that not everyone around the world is going to be able to admit and say, yes, I am suffering from PTSD and I need support. Right. And so it's very cruel what we do to these migrants that are fleeing from something horrible. Like there was a mother who witnessed her child and her husband and her father killed in front of her, and she survived by miracle, made it to the US. And we still put her in a detention center, and we still asked for thousands of dollars for her release, knowing full well that what she needed was somebody to listen to her, to welcome her, to be home, not for months in a detention center.
How can we support friends or people that have gone through this immigration process? And how do you think others can help with the situation at the border?
That's an excellent question. We encourage dialogue and the creation of safe spaces for people to speak about, and acknowledging that not everyone goes through the same or the traditional forms of healthcare. It might look different from other people, and it might be cultural. And so there are those considerations that also that we would have to be mindful about in order to reduce the stigma that is still very much present in our communities in the US. I'll give an example. We have a talk, I'm sure will be in our social media by the time your listeners listen to this, but we will have Grace Desma talk to us about community healing. And that kind of conversation is very different from traditionally what you would hear from a more formal mental health assessment, right? And so there are other ways that we can take care of ourselves outside of that system that might be different for us, for people that come from other countries. And so that's one way. These things are not being talked about or considered, and these spaces need to still be created. And so we have a lot of work in offering a place for people to speak out about this, whether it's a community center, whether it's a church, or maybe in your youth group, whatever it may be. Destigmatizing is still something that we have a lot of work to do when it comes to our migrant community. But I do suggest that you engage with us and us on Instagram, on Facebook. Our social media handles at BorderAngels Official. And in YouTube, we're going to start putting a series of these talks there as well. And support the organizations that are doing this work. The Refugee Health Alliance in San Diego is one that's doing cross-border support. And that was started by someone in medical school, and just blew it out of the water and out of the park, and it has turned it into a very beautiful project with a lot of volunteers from all over the US that come and support the shelters in Tijuana. There's also the Psicólogos Sin Fronteras that could also use more volunteers and support the psychologists in Tijuana. And then I would say it sounds easy to say, but also the use of language matters. It's very important. We saw how hateful language and rhetoric turns into laws and policies that last for many generations, causing this pain and this trauma. And it's not just about sticks and stones. It really has real repercussions on the ground. And the use of language when it comes to our immigrant community needs to change so that it's more welcoming and embracing and loving, and not what the prior administration did, which caused a lot of heartache. And that's why we saw people emboldened to go from hate language to hate crimes and shoot people in Texas. We saw in 2019, and say, I'm going to go hunt me Mexicans, and then shoot other people based on their skin color or wherever they might think folks are coming from. So we have to change the language that we use. We have to be kinder to ourselves and kinder to others, and that does have real impact.